to listen more than we talk sometimes, and to feel comfortable or find the comfort to talk with people that don't share the same perspectives as we do.
How do you create a brighter future? A more just and equal world? We start with understanding the issues, exploring solutions, and diving into deep conversations. Welcome to the Conversation Space with Equal Justice Now, a show that examines the issue of police reform, the criminal justice system, and preserving the right to vote for all Americans. Join us as we sit down to listen and learn from thought leaders, advocates, and those on the front lines of expanding equality. We welcome you as we explore the world that could be.
Hi, this is another great episode of the Equal Justice Now podcast. Today, we have a very special guest, as we always do, Judy Powell. Ms. Powell, how are you doing today?
I am doing fantastic. Thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. What city are you currently in?
I am just outside of Maryville, Tennessee, which is southeast corner right by the Smoky Mountains.
Okay, understood. Well, today I am in Houston, Texas, and it is a gloomy day, a bit cloudy, but it's Monday, so kind of goes together. It's all good. Judy, if you don't mind, for the viewers, can you give us a bit about yourself, where you come from, your background, how'd you get started in, policing and everything else you do?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's a very crooked road. I'm born and raised in Canada, spent the first part of my career focused on professional sports. I worked for the Edmonton Oilers and loved that. However, I always wanted to be a police officer, but back in the day, I was too short. So gave up on that dream, went into working in professional hockey. Then I worked as a public relations consultant for 4 years in Edmonton, Alberta. And then I made the transition to television news, quite by accident, as most of my career runs. Worked in television news for about 6.5 years, and then finally was able to make the move to my passion, which is communication for law enforcement. My local police department in Halifax, Nova Scotia, was not communicating the way that, as a media person, I thought they could be. I made the happy accident of phoning the chief of police, and within 60 days, I was their first professional staff communicator. From there, I went on to serve with 7 different police agencies. Very, very fortunate to work in places like Irvine, California, very safe city, Atlanta, Savannah, Milwaukee, Baltimore, and New York City. So it has been a vast and varied experience for me, and I've learned so much from the very smart people that I've been able to work with.
No, that's amazing. That's an amazing background and a different one. We often talk to leaders in the community, police officers, police chiefs. But this is a different kind of perspective here. What was it like, or what is it like, working with sworn officers on the daily and having such a high-ranking position?
That's a great question, because at first, back in the 90s, as a unicorn, really within the profession, as not only a civilian staff person, but also as a female, oh my gosh, it was a little bit difficult. But the chief at that point was so far ahead of his colleagues in understanding the value of both internal communication and community communication. He really was able to convey how important this position was. And then it was my job over 5.5 years that I was in Halifax to kind of prove my worth, which I believe I did. They've had a professional staff person in there ever since. And interestingly enough, in Canada, law enforcement is quite far ahead of the United States when it comes to the value of communications, both internally and with the community. So almost every department in Canada actually has someone like me, a strategic communications pro, to help them not only get their message out, but to find ways to build those relationships, which are so important in law enforcement today.
100%. Equal Justice Now is like 1,000% focused on making sure that the relationship between the community and the police departments are for sure one filled with transparency. So, with that, everything you said, transparency comes to mind. And it seems like you approach what you do with a large dose of transparency. Would you say that's the case? And how important is that to you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, transparency and legitimacy are kind of buzzwords being used in our profession in law enforcement today. But it all comes back to community building and trust. I mean, you go back millennia and you look at Sir Robert Peel when he talked about, the public are the police are the public. And I think we need to better understand that. We went from back in the 20s and 30s and 40s of law enforcement, where media would actually be embedded with police departments, to the 50s and 60s, where say nothing, say nothing, say nothing. We're keeping everything behind closed doors. And now realizing that how that transpired into the 80s and the 2000s and onward, that didn't work so well. There's this whole brand that was developed, that there is the thin blue line. It's us versus them. We are the thin blue line that separates the 95% from the 5%. And that's absolutely ridiculous. What we need to realize is that public safety is a shared responsibility. And the more police made it an us and they, has not gone well for us. And I think now is the time that we have to revisit that, as much as, and I'm sure you understand, tradition is a huge part of law enforcement. Well, that's our tradition, thin blue line. I said, okay, get over it now. Let's start looking at what that's done for us and what has the outcome of that been. And it hasn't worked well. So, the NYPD, when I was working there, came up with a new slogan, and it was beautiful. Public safety is a shared responsibility. And I think every police agency across the country has to realize that it's not us against them, it's us collectively, all together, working to make our communities safer.
No, 100%. We just did a podcast, a great conversation about, just the relationship with the police departments and communities, and what it looks like now and what it should look like years from now. And we spoke on exactly this, the idea that it's not one sided when we're speaking on the transparency or the accountability aspect. And that brings me to my next question. Like, what do you think about social media these days and its impact on that whole realm of transparency and accountability, and just even the message or image that it paints of the community and of the police department? Do you think that maybe the community can play a better role with maybe per se taking video of when they get released on, or get a warning on a speeding ticket, and instead of an actual ticket, or instead of actually being taken in because they've met a good cop that day, they should record that? That was my thought process, right? And when it comes to media, because everyone wants to record something when it's negative, let's record something when it's positive. So can you talk to us a bit about your thought process when it comes to social media and the impact that it has in this world?
Well, Thomas, no one's going to click on the happy engagement. That's why people don't post them. Look, at social media is a double-edged sword. Law enforcement is just starting to muddle its way through, and like most government agencies, we're a little behind the eight ball when it comes to understanding the value of it. The value is this: we have an opportunity to engage directly with people in our community, all the people in our community. The challenge is that law enforcement, not everyone, and I certainly don't want to say every agency is doing this, but traditionally law enforcement has used it as a one-way tool to convey information, as opposed to seeing social media as an ongoing electric town hall meeting. So some departments, even by their legal people, say you are not allowed to respond on social media. So that's horrible. So they're putting stuff out. The community says, well, hey, what about the derelict cars that have been parked in my neighborhood for 5 months, and they hear nothing from police? Well, that's not what social media is about. Social media is about true engagement. The challenge that we run into are the number of people that are using social media for simply nefarious gains. The trolls, the bots, the sock puppets, all the factions that are out there really just trying to sow division, sow distrust, fear, and anger in our communities. I mean, there's four things that make people money on social media that get the clicks to go viral, and that's making people angry, making people fearful, dividing us, which has gone over very well, and humor. That's why the silly cat videos always do so well. But the what you're saying is, hey, why don't we post those good engagements? What I think really is interesting is that every now and then a video will go viral of a police officer playing basketball with a group of kids, or helping tie a young man's tie when he's going to graduation. Those kind of things happen every single day, and to law enforcement, that's just what good cops do. What's interesting, and I say this to my classes all the time, I'll be really happy when that video doesn't go viral, because something goes viral because it's out of the ordinary. Oh my goodness, look, a police officer doing something great. I'll be really happy when that basketball video isn't viral and traditional news media don't pick up on those stories, because I think most people in our communities realize the vast majority of cops really are in this for the right reason. So social media is a fantastic way to engage with our communities. I think we need to get better at developing the brand and communicating in ways that we haven't been so comfortable to communicate.
Absolutely. That was very well put, I'll say. Social media is an extremely tricky thing. It so many different people from so many different backgrounds and thought process have access to the same information and same content. So with
Yes.
that, it can really get tricky, and everyone doesn't have well wishes when they are putting out this content. So yeah, it can get.
Can I interject just for a second what you mentioned there? Geographically, as you know, we're all very different across the United States. And I think one of the biggest challenges for law enforcement, when one agency posts something that is 100% relevant and okay in their community, and then someone from 8 states over looks at it and it's not appropriate for their community and their way of thinking, it actually causes a lot of, not just it probably doesn't cause much dialogue, but it essentially causes that friction. And as much as it's important for law enforcement to be engaged with the community that we serve, understanding that the audience could be a worldwide audience that absolutely doesn't agree with one phase or another, that makes it even more challenging.
Yeah, yeah, 100%. And it's so impactful. I mean, like, look at the tragic killing and death of George Floyd. That moment and the key role that social media played. I mean, it was just crazy. It was like you couldn't go on social media, you couldn't go on Facebook, you couldn't go on any of these platforms without seeing this content, and it being so tragic of a situation. Speaking of George Floyd, do you see that situation as a watershed moment for law enforcement in general?
I think so. A friend of mine at the NYPD called Derek Chauvin. He said, I refuse to call him a police officer. I'll call him someone who impersonates a police officer. And I think that's what I would call him. I do think it started a little further back. I think Ferguson kind of started us taking a better look at ourselves. And then as we move forward, there has been, as you know, myriad events where law enforcement officers have been caught doing the wrong thing. I think what we do need to understand is that I don't think you could talk to anyone in either the law enforcement community or communities across the country that would say that officer malfeasance is going up, as in numbers going up. I think definitely there's been we've moved so far ahead, and there's a lot less. But as you said, now people are seeing it. And no use of force, even if it's just putting handcuffs on someone, looks good. Absolutely, it doesn't. And the problem or the challenge that we have, both as law enforcement professionals and the community understanding, is the decontextualization of that event. What oftentimes you see in social media, certainly not relative to the Derek Chauvin case, but definitely relevant in other cases, there'll be police officers trying to de-escalate a situation for 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, but the 3 second that shows up on social media or traditional news media is the use of force to take someone into custody or to disarm them. And then the community explodes and be like, no, no. So we have to do a better job of saying, look, here's the entirety of what happened here and judge from the entirety of what happened here. When George Floyd was murdered, the entirety was shown thanks to someone that was there on site. And it made everything very clear. And we were able to see justice served in that case.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to, pause for a second and say thank you for everything that you've done, up until this point in your line of work to help, just this entire conversation. It's extremely hard work, and we at Equal Justice Now like to focus on that hard work of give flowers while you're still here type of, kudos on our podcast and, every other platform that we put together and am in conversation with law enforcement to any capacity. So thank you for everything that you do on the daily. We know it is not easy work, and we want that kind of understanding to be everyday, pushed to the public because sometimes we can forget that. So with that being said, if you had a magic wand and you had a special power because of that wand. And with that special power, you were going to choose to change one thing about all police departments. So all of the police departments would do it. With that magic wand being, what would it be?
Wow.
You have a moment to think about this.
I wasn't prepared for that question. So many things, so many things. The first thing that comes to mind, Thomas, is this. We as law enforcement have to remember what we're here for: keeping people safe in their homes, people keeping safe on their streets, keeping people safe in schools. We have to remember that we have not always been on the right side of the law, and I think that's important. We have to remember our history in the United States and remember where we are. And lastly, I'm putting these all in one because it's all about remembering, okay? Um, and the last one is remembering that it's important for us to listen more than we talk sometimes and to feel comfortable or find the comfort to talk with people that don't share the same perspectives as we do. And I think that's a huge challenge for law enforcement. And people in law enforcement sometimes forget that those we serve do not have the same experience that we may have had growing up in running into law enforcement, working with law enforcement, seeing law enforcement. And I think it's really important that we remember that not everyone's perception of us, because perception really is the truth, is the same as what we see law enforcement as being. How's
I just
that?
want to say that strategically, what you just said was so cool because and so impactful that even if we amplify that thought process past just law enforcement into just in society and just globally, we would be all right. There would be hardly any of the issues that we have today if we just kind of checked our perspective, stepped out of our shoes, and checked someone else's perspective and had appreciation and patience for understanding in that thought process. So, no, I definitely agree. If you, I would vote for you to get the magic wand.
Thank you.
Because I definitely know that I have some good ideas, but that is one that could really be impactful within the communities, departments, and spreading as big as the world. So,
And
you
it
know,
takes courage. It takes a lot of courage to it takes courage even for. I'll give you a great example. After George Floyd was killed, a lot of my friends in the Black community were saying this was particularly horrific because here was a man calling out for his mother. And I said, okay, you need to explain that better to me because I don't understand. So I remember spending almost an hour on the phone with a friend of mine who works for the FBI. And I said, tell me why this in particular affects you so deeply. Because my experience as, white female Hungarian Canadian girl, I didn't realize the impact of that. And I think it takes courage for people to say, I don't understand how you feel and why you feel that way. So explain that to me. And man, that would go a long way as long as, and I'm blessed to have wonderful friends who understand I'm asking to understand, not to belittle, not to argue. Tell me so I can understand. And this is where we build those strong relationships. And I tell police agencies, if you don't have a community advisory board made up of all the demographics in your city, it was interesting, even I worked for two Black chiefs, and they both said, well, we need a Black advisory board. And I'm like, okay, you're Black. I'm like, why do we want to do this? He goes, because I don't know. Tony Batts was classic in Baltimore. He goes, because I'm a California Black. And I need to understand how Baltimore Blacks are seeing the police department. And that is courage and that is strength to understand that, even as whoever you are, there's going to be people that have different perspectives.
100%, and that's what makes this such a special country, and so forth. So, yeah, no, I agree. I agree. You know, law enforcement, we don't know where things are headed, but if you could, you know, pull your magic wand out and give it one more,
Again,
where do you think you'll see, law enforcement 10 years from now? And furthermore, where do you think that agencies currently today are preparing for the future in the right way?
I honestly do. I think we've had, as you said, some watershed moments that have made us look in the mirror and maybe not like what we see so much in some areas. I do see a growing trend towards we've got to do a much better job communicating. I definitely see additional transparency. The challenge we face, because law enforcement has been talking about transparency and bridge building for years. It wasn't just the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing. You can go back to 1931 when we were talking about law enforcement will be doing what it's supposed to be doing if we start working with our communities. The challenge that I'm seeing in the work that I do is police chiefs recognize it, but we as a profession have done a disservice to our police leaders in not teaching them about communication. So, as many of my smart bosses have said, Judy, I don't know what I don't know. So when they bring in a communications expert to start shining light on some of this stuff, and quite honestly, having to tell some police chiefs that their baby is ugly, which is not a comfortable conversation, they're starting to realize we've got to do a better job in the communicating the way we were in the 1970s and 1980s isn't cutting it for us. So I tell chiefs, until there's a budget line that says public relations and communications, you're not taking this seriously enough. I do see that changing. And I do hope that we start paying enough attention to our brand and our brand image, as weird as that sounds for a law enforcement agency, but to bring it so it is more inclusive and bring it more towards shared responsibility. It'll make a huge difference. And once we start focusing more on outcomes versus outputs, that will make a difference. We're doing it already with the tactics that we're using. Bill Bratton talks, talks a great, talks a lot about, hey, look it's like someone with cancer. They go in and they have all this aggressive work done on them, but when the cancer dissipates, you stop using the aggressive medical treatments and you lay back. So law enforcement goes into a community and it goes back to the federal weed and seed programs. They go in there and aggressively weed out those that are doing harm to people in that community. But then are we doing a good enough job to seed in and support a community that wants to actually grow and create that? And I really think communication plays a big role in that. And it's also a desire now, and I see this also growing, is we need to be part of the solution, not just uh, there's I apologize for going on too long, but there was a police officer in London that said by the time something reaches us, society has already failed. And I kind of love that. So we're seen as you're the one having to make the arrest. You're the one that's having to deal with persons experiencing homelessness or experiencing mental distress or, experiencing a drug addiction. But there's a lot of other stuff that happened before then. So I think we're now starting to realize as law enforcement, and I hope government is as well, that it needs to be a more of a holistic approach. And I know that's something that you espouse. And I just think that we all have a better role that we can play in that.
Judy Powell, ladies and gentlemen, she has all of the answers and 100% on point from everything I've heard from beginning to end today on this podcast. Judy, we appreciate you taking the time. I would love to do a part two with you to get deeper into this conversation when your schedule permits, if you'd like. And I think that just this part one here is going to educate so many people and give so many people different thought process on police reform and accountability, transparency, and community reform, right? And that's something we want to hear screamed a little bit more as well, community reform and just in general coming together. So, Judy Powell, ladies and gentlemen, we appreciate you so much. We'll throw the applause in the edit.
Thank
Uh,
you.
sure. If you have nothing else in mind, I will let you go today. And this is another episode of the Equal Justice Now podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.